Welcome to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. Happy Monday, everybody. It's a marvelous Monday here on the Russ Joy Show. Nice little afternoon. It's a later than usual show. I'm not going to throw Phightin Words under the bus. I would never do such a thing. They are part of the Joy Media Network here. So we are going to not throw them under the bus. However, Ant and Big Bet Bob, they just did a great show. I would highly recommend if you were looking for in-depth analysis on what befell the Phillies over the weekend, that will be the place to go today. We're going to touch on the Phillies very briefly on this show, but they did an episode of Phightin Words. Did I know they were going to do an episode of Phightin Words? I did not. I found out because I got a little notification on my phone because, as you know, you're supposed to like the video, share the video, subscribe, and you ring the bell to get notifications. So I get notifications from the Phightin Words YouTube channel, from the Joy Media YouTube channel when they went live, and it said, Too Many Brews. It said, Anthony Sanfilippo on Twitter is live, Too Many Brews. And I got the two from YouTube, and I went, well, that's interesting. What the hell's Too Many Brews? And I thought, maybe Ant is doing a show with Glenn Mack now. And I pulled it up, and I said, well, that's Ant and Big Bet Bob. And I said, well, that's interesting. Because usually there's a protocol to setting up a show. You do all kinds of stuff that has to be done. And they did not. And so they did their show. It was a great show. But it threw back the timing of this show because, as you can imagine, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have two shows from the same network going live at the same time, unless you're a big old network like ESPN, who probably is going to end up ruining inside the NBA. We might get to that later, or we'll get to it later in the week. But they did their show. And I said, all right, well, I guess I'm going to push back the Russ Joy Show, and that's okay. It's a great thing, okay? It's fine. Good baseball talk. Great way to kind of lead into the later afternoon. And so here we are today. And I have to tell you, there's stuff to talk about. But boy, oh boy, it's one of those days where I'm glad that my main job isn't just to talk about the Philly teams and try to, drum up interest in certain things. Because I got to be honest with you. The Phillies are kind of a mess right now, as we've talked about quite a bit on this show, and the bullpen is still a disaster, and the defense is horrendous. And it's gotten to the point now where I'm still keeping up with the Phillies, but I'm not living and dying with every pitch with the Phillies. Now, obviously, as the NBA and the NHL kind of close up shop, and we start to get ready for the respective drafts, I'll go back in on the Phillies for every pitch. But while I have Phightin Words doing the yeoman's work on the team on Mondays and Fridays, I'm not watching every pitch of the Phillies right now. I find them maddening. And I find the decision to allow Jesus Luzardo to remain in a game that was getting away from him very quickly. I think that the fact that they left him into that game and essentially killed any hopes he could have ever had of winning a Cy Young, and maybe even killed his chances of making an all-star team, is organizational malpractice. Should not have happened. Managerial discretion was not used in a very intelligent way. But we'll get there in a little bit. But first, I'd like to add to the comments, and I am going to. I forgot to do this at the start, but I'll do it over here. Where you can see my hand, you can see Bucky. And this is where all the comments live now. They will live as a running feed, and I'll get to as many as I can and highlight them on the screen. But if you're on YouTube or Facebook, you just comment away. If you're on X, you have to click the video first and then go into old Periscope mode. If you drop your comment in there, I can bring it up on the screen. So here we go. Raymond Suppers just populated as the first one. The other ones might, but if not, I'll get to those as well. But we have a lot to get into. Phillies, we have to get into the Saquon Barkley Madden cover, and something interesting happening at one of the resident cheesesteak places that's rebranding for a week because of Saquon making the Madden cover. And we got to talk about the NBA and NHL finals, both of which start later this week. NBA is on Wednesday and NHL is on Thursday. It's one or the other. But they are so incredibly spaced out, and I have a legitimate problem with it, and we're going to talk about that as well. And if there are other things that you guys want to get to here on a Marvelous Monday, we can get there as well. But first, before we get into the nitty-gritty of it all, Chris Freed over on YouTube says, so what's the deal with your Saturday tweet threatening violence against another podcast? Well, let's be careful with the threatening violence, Chris. I, of course, am a lover, not a fighter. My last name is Joy. I have to be a good boy. There is no way for me to, kind of go after this. And I have to tell you, there was somebody who just DM'd me something that I did have, and I don't have it on the rundown of the show. There was a really awful quote by an ESPN person against the NHL. We're going to get to that a little bit later on in the show. But I'll go to what Chris is talking about just really quickly. Over the weekend, Maybe it was at the end of last week. I don't remember. I got tipped off about a podcast that is largely irrelevant to me. I've genuinely never listened to an episode of theirs. And they were slandering Snow the Goalie, the Only Flyers podcast. And I couldn't believe, and I was like, you know what? Back in the day, I used to get worked up about that kind of stuff. I really did. Way back when, I used to get myself very worked up, and I'd get very territorial when it came to like Flyers podcasts. And I'd get very territorial when it came to Philly sports podcasts. Like way back in the day when Lefko, Kyle and I were doing Crossing Broadcast, I was always on top of that stuff. And if somebody said something negative, I'd take it kind of to heart a little bit and all that kind of stuff. I want to know the goalie. Like there was definitely a period where like I was more reactionary than I probably should have been. And I might have stirred some shit with other podcasts at the time. And a lot of that was just in good fun. And in fairness, like those people, they went on to find other jobs within like doing their show and they get paid for it. And that's awesome. And I wish them all the best. But then like I see the other day that some jamoke from a show I've never listened to is questioning the credibility of Snow the Goalie and Snow the Goalie's reporting. And at that point I go, oh no. There was like a fire burning within. And internally I know it's probably not a great idea to go to war with a podcast that I've never listened to and somebody that I genuinely did not know existed until I saw the slanderous tweet. And I thought to myself, do I really do this? Do I go full bore? Do I incite a refreshed, we'll say, war? It's not really a refresh. A refresh would have been hashing old things out with another show that I think we've since long made peace with. But do I really want to go out of my way to like start something with somebody that I don't think ultimately is going to matter? And I went, I don't know. So then I just thought I'd feel out how people would feel on X. And so I put this tweet out. Of course, it's CM Punk, and that's in his AEW days. And, well, if you're a wrestling fan, you know how that went. But I just simply tweeted the other day, Ruh-roh, a guy from a Flyer show I've never listened to is slandering Snow the Goalie. Do I go to war? I'm old, I'm tired, but I still might have one left in me. And then at some point, this guy, Ben, I don't know who Ben is, but Ben follows me, I guess. And Ben got very in his feelings about the CM Punk reference and about Brawl Out. And if you don't follow pro wrestling or you don't follow AEW, you'd have no idea what any of this means. But like, there was a whole big thing here. And then Bill Meltzer came in, and it was amazing. Like Bill Meltzer got involved, and it was incredible, and I loved it, and I loved everything about it. Where's it at? Bill Meltzer calling the Young Bucks the Cucamonga Kids, which means that Bill is probably a Jim Cornette listener. And boy, that just got me, and I laughed. I laughed a lot. Anyway, so this tweet goes out, and there was somebody who quote tweeted this morning, and they're like,
There's a reason why I've never listened. I've listened to every Flyers podcast except for Snow the Goalie. This is why.
At which point it's like, shut the fuck up. Anyway, so I put that tweet out, and I've been going back and forth in my mind. Do I declare open war on a show I've never listened to? And I have decided that pending like another violation, I'm not going to go to war because there's no point. There's like virtually no upside. Except to like have a little bit of fun on social media, which if you followed me for a while, you know, I enjoy like a good social media spat. I'm here for it. But I don't think I'm going to go fully to war with a show that, again, I've never listened to before. But I do think this person is wildly misguided because the accusation was effectively that like, we don't talk to anybody, we don't have sources, we don't know what we're doing. And that is certainly not true. In fact, there are a few of our listeners who are up for Press Row Show at some point this season, and they saw Anthony talking to somebody of note, and they saw me talking to somebody of note, and then we ended up going on the show, and we had some other sourced info, and you combine it with some other stuff, and they're like, wow, wait, so you guys talked to this person, and we're like, oh, you saw that, okay. But we talked to a lot of people down there, and so the idea that like we are just fabricating shit and throwing it out there is nonsensical, but we'll get there. I don't think I have to get into it with goobers, but here we are. Hexram says Snow the Goalie is top tier. Pound sand peasants. Nick Johnson says Snow the Goalie is the only Flyers podcast. I think that's pretty true. Also, Jim Grosso says podcast on podcast crime. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I get the same thrill out of it anymore that I used to. You know, just getting into it with people used to be a lot of fun. Now I'm just old. Not that old. My oldest did just turn 10 though, and I have to tell you that like, for as young as I am, right, for having 4 kids, for as young as I am, him hitting 10 years old like shook me to the core. Because in this house, it's been like every 2 or 3 years, there's been a new baby in the house, and we're done. Like 4 was it, and so as our 4th kid is now like almost 2.5. I'm like realizing that there's not going to be another baby in the house, and that every first that the 4th child has will be the last first that we have as parents. It made me very sad. But anyway, my son had a great 10th birthday. It was a lot of fun. He will never forget his 10th birthday. It was a great day. But man, I feel old today. At least my hairline isn't receding. The grays have not come in yet. My wife claims there are 3 gray hairs in my beard. I don't think that's true. It must just be light glare. But we're getting there, folks. We're getting there. Anyway, I'll go over to the comments. Tony Lewis says, how many fan-made Flyers podcasts are there? It's so annoying. Every time I block one of them, 4 more pop up. It's like whack-a-mole. Not everyone needs their own podcast, and they all suck. Tony is very positive today. Tony, I wish everybody who tries to do a show a lot of success. You know, it's funny. I have talked to some people who don't do anything media-related, and they're like, you must make bank on your show, like on this show. And I was like, no, this is a labor of love. Eventually, I'd like to grow the show into being something that, like, can pay for a bill or two. But like, I'm not going crazy here. I have no expectations. I do this show for fun and for the fine folks who check in on YouTube, Facebook, and X, and in the podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcasts. But I thought about it, and I was like, you know, to be one of those shows that ends up getting like hundreds of thousands of downloads, millions of downloads, that's awesome. Kudos to those people. I haven't figured out what the hell I could possibly do that would entertain people that way. But if I ever do, it'd be cool. But I'm not taking pictures of my feet. I have hairy hobbit feet. Now, if this desk is too high, and I don't have the flexibility to lift my leg, but I have hairy hobbit feet. So there's nobody's going to spend money on pictures of these feet. So that's out. So yeah, like there goes one avenue of potentially making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Can you make that much money off of hairy hobbit feet? I don't think you can. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. Anthony DeGrazia says, that's exactly why I can't get into consistently podcasting. It's way too saturated. That's kind of like what I've run into a little bit with It's Just Wrestling. Like, it has a really nice YouTube channel. Like, and I've had a conversation or two about, like, bringing on a permanent co-host, because I think that would kind of help take it to the next level. But, like, it is such a saturated market. DeGrazia also says, the weird thing, but Flyers Twitter is that there are so many clicks. It's weird. I don't actually understand it anymore. Like, again, we used to, like, I think jokingly go to, like, battle with another show, and I think we buried that a long time ago. But there are still people who are, like, tangentially affiliated with it that really, like, weren't part of it at all, who still seem to hold, like, some weird grudge, which I just don't get. Let's see. Nick Johnson says, I think he knows who the person was, says, being serious, I hope that guy gets help. Being on Twitter all day, every day, nonstop tweeting is a problem, especially for how old he is. Ooh, I don't know if we're getting into the ageism of it all, but might be right. All right, anyway, Hexram says, hi, Russ. Love you, Russ. Hi, Hexram. Again, don't know if I love you or not, but I do appreciate you being here. AJ says, whoa, we're live and pretty much on time. Indeed. Chris Freed says you need to manage your boys better about Ant and Big Bet Bob. Let's see. Tony says, Bonk and Barkey looking great. What a great performance by Barkey, playing on one leg. Was a post away from a hat trick. Bonk shutting down Gavin McKenna. Good stuff. The Barkey of it all was really interesting. 2 goals. And one was I think the second one was on the breakaway. And you start to think about when you're building this team out and you're thinking about like what guys on the Flyers roster right now are going to be worth building around long term. We often talk about like, will Oliver Bonk end up being a top pair defenseman? Will he be a second pair defenseman? But like Bonk has always been on the radar. Bump, interestingly enough, his stock has really skyrocketed, and especially around the Frozen Four and the championship and everything, people got really into Bump. Barkey's almost like this underrated prospect for them, who like, I don't actually know what his role would be in the NHL, to be honest, but it feels like he has the kind of game that's scrappy, and he just figures out ways to make plays happen. And that still ultimately is a guy that you want to have on your team if you're trying to be a contending team, long-term playoff contender, and hopeful Stanley Cup contender. You need guys like that. So like Barkey's also going to be a guy to keep an eye on, especially prospect camp, and then maybe even making the big team next year. I wouldn't expect Barkey to. Bonk might have a chance. I think Bump actually has a legitimate shot to make the team, depending on how free agency goes and trades go. But it's interesting, too. You think about all the Bs, right? There's Bump and Barkey and Bonk and Brink. Not a lot of Bs. There used to be Beezer, but he's gone. Raymond Supper says, I predict the Stanley Cup will be a rout. It'll be the route the Super Bowl was. One team has the best player. The other team has a better roster. Panthers shut down. Kucherov, Point, Matthews, Marner, and Carolina. So obviously Ray thinks that this is going to be a very short series. Florida's going to win it. Connor Buss with a good point says Union finish a crazy month unbeaten, not focused on the Phils right now. By the way, that's also fair. And I keep meaning to get around to the Union, and I probably should. They're at top of the table. If you're not paying attention to the Philadelphia Union right now, and if you're not a soccer fan, there's not much of a reason for you to pay attention to them. And if you don't have Apple TV Plus, you can't get their games for the most part. I'll tell you what, top of the table after a coaching change, after a few moves in the offseason and a couple that really turned heads, and really an offseason that I don't think inspired a lot of confidence. The fact that this team somehow has once again found itself at the top of the table and unbeaten in the month of May and on a hell of a streak, it starts to make you wonder, could they be a legitimate contender in the conference? There are other teams in this league that might have more star power, that have bigger payrolls, and yet the Union continue to figure out a way to get it done. I always say it's Ernst Tanner. Ernst Tanner is the one who finds these guys, and he's the one that brings these guys in, and they somehow turn into all-stars. We might get to the Union this week. They're probably deserving of it. Connor says, went to Saturday's game, could really feel Luzardo's confidence free fall, which we're going to get to in a second. Jay Grabby says, don't like all the takes. The Flyers need more size down the middle. Their current top three centers are Coots at 6'4", Cates and Paling are both 6'2". Rossi's 5'9", about 190 pounds. He's a tank. I don't know if tank is what I would call him. I also don't think that those are the kind of centers that win you a Stanley Cup. Like, you're not winning a cup with Coots, Cates, Paling, and even Rossi down the middle. You need significantly better talent there. AJ says, I'd love to get into how absolutely fucking stupid it is. The NHL has a rematch of last year's Cup and didn't schedule a game for either last weekend or this coming weekend. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's actually something that I thought about bringing up over on the side rail, on the side screen here, and I think I will. Because, admittedly, in my brain, I thought that, I knew that the finals were going to be starting soon. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I know that they typically space these series out, but, it can't possibly be that bad, can it? And then I looked at it, and, it's even worse. I know that when we get to the final, in the Stanley Cup final, we get to the NBA finals, I know that it's always bad. But I don't know what it was. This feels significantly worse to me. I want to show you guys, and I mentioned earlier, the NHL, the Stanley Cup final starts on Wednesday, NBA finals start on Thursday. But to AJ's point, right, if we're looking at when you should try to market your game, when you should try to market, the ultimate pinnacle of your sport, you should probably make it where it's available, especially on the weekend, also at a decent hour. Just want to show you this really quick. Here's the NBA final schedule, okay? This starts on Thursday, okay? Game 1 is slated to start on Thursday at 8:30. Not a bad time. I can work in the 8s. The 8s are fine. A little bit late, but it's fine. Thursday, then they don't play again until Sunday night, which I question. I feel like Sunday should be dinner time. Why can't that be a 5 o'clock game on Sunday? I get that there's a time zone difference. Why can't it be a 5 or a 6 o'clock start? I always come back to if you're trying to grow the game and you're trying to make it more readily accessible to the next generation of fans, right? I know that we're getting close to summer. Some school districts are done. Some are on their last few days, and then some have another week left. Shouldn't you want the finals to be available to everyone? Okay. So you go Thursday, Sunday, then Wednesday, then a Friday, then a Monday. So no Saturday or Sunday game next weekend. And if it goes to game 6, which I don't even know if it will, that's 3 days later. That's a Thursday. And then if that doesn't work out, you're looking at the following, is that a Monday, the 22nd, I think? No, it's a Sunday. What are we doing here? It's so spaced out. Why? And then if you look at the Stanley Cup final is like almost even more infuriating. So they start on Wednesday, then they play Friday night. So if we look at this, heads up, you have the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday alternating between the NBA and NHL. So it's not the worst thing. And a Friday night, you're not going to catch me complaining. And by the way, Edmonton way out in the West, they could have somehow bullshit their way into saying, a 9 o'clock start is more advantageous to the fine folks of Edmonton. No. So 8 o'clock starts across the board. I also love the fact that it's consistent. 8 o'clock, great. So you go Wednesday, Friday, Monday, big gap to Thursday, Saturday, and then you're going 3 days later, and then another 3 days. So let's see, is there an overlap at all? We have a Wednesday, we have the 4th and the 6th, no. We have the 8th and the 9th alternating, so no. We have the 11th, 12th, 13th, no overlap there. How about the 14th? No. Nothing on the 15th for either league, which is going to feel weird. You have the 16th in the NBA, the 17th in the NHL, nothing on the 18th. The 19th would be Game 6 of the NBA. The 17th would be Game 6 of Oilers-Panthers. Then the 20th would close out the Stanley Cup final if it gets to 7 games, which I find possible. We'll talk about that in a second. And then, in theory, you could have a 2-day gap until Game 7 of an NBA Finals that will certainly not get to 7 games on the 22nd. But here's my problem. You're looking at 17 days from the start of the NBA Final to what could end up being Game 7. And if you're an NHL fan, you're looking at a 16-day gap from Game 1 in Edmonton to a potential Game 7 in Edmonton. And I'm sorry, I get that you want these players to be as healthy as possible and you have to allow for travel and all that. I get it. Fine. These series take too long, and it is going to kill the excitement around the final series in each league. I don't understand why we need to ensure so much time in between. To me, it feels ridiculous. I mean, even when the conference finals were going on, we were talking about the fact that the NHL conference finals, it was every other day, and it still kind of felt like it was taking a long time. Now you're talking about the same thing, and then you have this bigger gap in between where you have a 3-day gap between Game 2 and Game 3. They just feel too spread out, and I don't enjoy it. I honestly think that it's it's a buzzkill. I think it's a buzzkill. Connor Buss agrees, says Cup final schedule is horrendous. Ray Supper says Bettman wants a beach day between Games 3 and 4. Anthony DeGrazio says it's all a money grab. And also says NHL games should not be played in June. First round shouldn't be 7 games. There's actually a point to be made for that. I just think that it's way too long. And if you're trying to get excited, right? What's the thing that builds the most excitement as you're watching the best 2 teams or the teams that are supposed to be the best in their respective conferences? What's the thing that gets you excited? You want to see them play on back-to-back nights. You want to see there only be a 1-day gap between playing in one arena and then having to go across the country playing in another. The entirety of the series should take at most, 10 days, 11 days? We're talking about 14, 16 days. It needs to take over 2 weeks to play 7 games? I think not. I think it's pathetic. Now, the good news for the NHL and the NBA is that they at least were smart enough to not schedule each other on the same day. So you will, in theory, if you get to a point where these series do get into games 5, 6, and 7, you are going to have that feeling of almost every other night there's a championship game on TV. Now, I don't think that there's a ton of crossover in NBA and NHL fandoms. I really don't. I'm one of them. But I don't know a lot of people who are going to go out of their way to watch every Stanley Cup final game and are going to watch every NBA finals game. But I'll be one of those people. So the fact that I kind of get treated to a game a night, I guess it's nice. I just hate the gaps in between. I think they're too long. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just me. Maybe it's just my fault. Now, Steven over here says 2 teams nobody wants to watch. I don't know. Which one are you talking about? Because I can tell you that the NBA Finals, I am not excited at all. The NHL Final, the Stanley Cup Final, I'm moderately excited. A rematch of last year. You have the best player in the world in Connor McDavid taking on what is probably the best team in the Florida Panthers. That to me is kind of exciting. I can get behind it. The NBA, I think, is going to be a bloodbath. I guess we'll go there first, and then we'll get back to the Philly stuff of it all, Philly sports of it all. Nick Johnson says, I love hockey. I won't be paying for 3 separate streaming services to follow the playoffs, so I just watch the highlights, which is the exact opposite of what the league would want to hear, you know. Joe Fisher says, I miss the days in the late 80s and 90s when they played back-to-back games, then on off night to go to the next arena and played the next 2, and then the 3 every night in the new arena. I agree. Jerry Martin also says, agree with you, too many large gaps between games, but let's go Edmonton. On the NHL side of things, I could not be more excited with a matchup than Oilers and Panthers. Now, in fairness, it would have been great to see Edmonton lose in the first round to the Kings because it would have meant a much more valuable pick to the Flyers. But once it was clear that like Edmonton was going to get very far in the Stanley Cup playoffs, I didn't care at that point. It's like they can win or lose whenever. I don't think that this series is going to be particularly close. You could, in theory, try to convince me that the NHL could be sitting on a gold mine here and that this series could go 7 games and Connor McDavid etches himself into hockey lore and turns himself into a postseason legend, and Connor McDavid like scores a hat trick in Game 7 to hoist the Stanley Cup, finally bring the Stanley Cup back to Canada, rah, rah, rah. I don't see it. And in fact, I was talking to somebody else, Canadian, guy in Toronto earlier today, and you know he's devastated about the Leafs not getting to the Stanley Cup final. And he's like, I think that the best player is ultimately going to matter the most. And I said, I don't think it will. Because I think Florida just as a team is a significantly better team than Edmonton is. McDavid has the ability to go do unbelievable things that very few players, if any, can do on the planet. And yet, I think Skinner's played way over his head. And if you look at Skinner's starts, he's 6-4 in the postseason. And like to me, there's a very easy case to be made here that like Skinner is not going to be as good as he's been to this point. And then you're talking about Pickard playing, or Pickard, about him going in net. And like I said, could we get to a point in the middle of the series where Skinner gets pulled because Edmonton's behind? And now you have the mid-series goalie swap. It's like the Pete DeBoer special, what he did to Ottinger. Could we see the same thing pop up? I don't know. I think that's more likely than not, though. Like if I had to put money on it right now, which I will not be doing, I would say that there's a good chance Florida gets this thing done in 5, maybe 6. But I don't see this going 7. I don't see Edmonton winning it. Now, I know people are going to disagree. We have Anthony here who says Panthers in 5. Jay Grebby says Oilers in 7. Joe Fisher says last year went to 7. It could happen again this year or be shorter. Well, those are the only that is true. AJ says Oilers in 6. This year's Oilers have way better depth scoring than any other season. They're also better at matching Florida's bullshit between the whistles. Steven says Thrashers in 7. Tony says Oilers are better than they were last year, especially defensively. They also have home ice. If Skinner doesn't absolutely suck, Edmonton has a shot for sure. That's where I think the thing falls apart, though. I just don't think Skinner's that good. And so, to that end, I think he's going to get exposed. And I think what you're going to see is Edmonton's going to have to win in high-scoring games. And their problem, obviously, is that Bobrovsky has been playing out of his mind. And if Bobrovsky is locked in, Edmonton, to me, has no shot. I'd say if I really had to put money, I'd say Panthers in 6. But I think Panthers in 5 is a legitimate potential outcome. I just don't see Edmonton walking away with this one. Now, if it gets to a Game 7, Skinner played a really good series the entire way through, maybe only has one bad game, and you get back to Edmonton with a Game 7, Skinner like riding a nice little hot streak, and, you know, Draisaitl and McDavid are doing what they do, then sure. Like, we'll have the conversation on the show. And I'll be happy to be wrong. And I think for the game, it's probably a good thing if we end up seeing Connor McDavid win the Stanley Cup with Edmonton. You know, it'd be nice of him to win it for them before he leaves them in the summer of 2026 and signs with the Philadelphia Flyers for like $20 million a year. But, like, go and win in Edmonton first, you know? Nice thing. Joe Fisher says, just think if we never traded Bob. Well, I mean, this has been talked about a lot, but, like, Ed Snyder kind of banging on the table, asking about who is the best free agent goalie, being told it's Briz, him saying, well, then go get me Brizgalov, and some of the front office people being like, yeah, but we're not totally sure that he's like the guy, and Snyder being like, I don't care, go get me my number 1 goalie. And they did, and in doing so, they found out that Briz didn't want to have Bobrovsky under his wing. He didn't want to mentor Bobrovsky. Perhaps he felt I don't know, intimidated by this young up-and-coming goalie who still wasn't like a sure thing at the time. And they end up getting rid of Bobrovsky, and he goes on to win Vezina, win Stanley Cup, and probably win another Stanley Cup this year. So not great. Not great. Nick says Bob asked for a trade because he was stuck behind Briz. Briz was not going to take the ice with Bobrovsky on this team. So make of that what you will. Okay. Tony says, I got 4-1 on the Oilers after Dallas won game 1, so I'm not trying to hear any of this. Okay, so that's the NHL side of things. The NBA side, like, to me, is a bloodbath. I know that sometimes we talk about the NBA playoffs here, but, like, I think it's going to be a bloodbath. There is, like, no path to me that Indiana does a good job in this series. I think Indiana is going to be a disaster. And I know that, like, they're riding high after taking down the Knicks, and the Knicks were supposedly this, like, darling team, and it was the Nova Knicks. And listen, Pascal Siakam is a winner. Tyrese Halliburton certainly appears to be a winner. And they have guys on that team that can show up, that are role players, that can, like, actually do a good job from time to time and can be clutch in certain moments. But there is nothing to prepare them for what they're about to run into in Oklahoma City. I wouldn't go sweep, but I think the Thunder in 5 is almost like the easiest money you could make in the postseason in either league. If it goes beyond 5 games, I'd be shocked. If Indiana, let's just play this one out. If Indiana were to somehow win the NBA Finals, it would probably be the most unlikely run in a decade. I'm trying to think of the last time that we would have seen a team go through a postseason test like Indy had to. Like, remember, they started off, now Dame blew out his Achilles, which fundamentally changed the Bucks series. But they took down Milwaukee in 5 games. They took down a 64-win team, right, in Cleveland, the number 1 seed. They absolutely smoked Cleveland in 5 games. They took on a Knicks team that many were picking to go to the finals once they took down the Celtics themselves. That got to 6 games, but Indy blew out the Knicks in the final game, in Game 6. If they're able to somehow go out and just, I don't know, whether it's dominance or not, if they're able to go out and take down a 68-win team, Oklahoma City Thunder squad, that has looked practically unbeatable in the postseason, it would be one of the most remarkable postseason runs of any team to win the finals. I'll actually be very interested. Like, if Indy can steal Game 1 or Game 2, then we have a series. I just don't see how it happens. Jerry goes, Cavs in 17? No. JT Chips says, NHL, back to the schedule. NHL's fine because of how long the travel is. Because they are. They're going from way up in Edmonton out west to way down in Florida in the southeast. You're also going through customs, fine. I still think 16 days is too long. Joe says the T-Wolves also came out of nowhere. They did, although they were there last year too. Timberwolves had a really good run last year, which is kind of what got Anthony Edwards like really on the nationwide radar. He was there anyway, but last postseason was a big one for him. And then he kind of folded, unfortunately, against the Thunder. Okay, we have the NBA and the NHL out of the way. Now, I do want to talk about a couple of other things. And one of them was something that was touched on Phightin Words earlier today. And it's what happened to Jesus Luzardo, which I think is a crime against humanity. Actually, hold on. Before I get there, I forgot. Because I was just talking about the NBA and the NHL. Can I, really quick, one of the networks that happens to have the rights to some of those games, we saw one of the dumbest quotes. And this is something that's like almost certainly got to get this guy in trouble. So Tim McMahon, who is a writer for ESPN, he was on a show that I think he's going to get in trouble with ESPN. I don't know how big of trouble he's going to get in, but this is a brain-dead opinion to have when your network owns the rights to NBA and NHL games and you're about to start the respective finals in each sport. And I usually like Tim McMahon. I usually like his analysis about the NBA. But he said one of the dumbest fucking things you could possibly say on a network that, again, owns rights to some games in the playoffs, including the Stanley Cup Final. Let's listen to what Tim McMahon had to say in the midst of a conversation about the Pacers. He then kind of pivoted abruptly to the NHL. Let's hear what Tim McMahon of ESPN had to say. Again, ESPN that has the rights to the Stanley Cup Final. Okay. Tim, how do you feel about the NHL?
Here's the thing. I'll just tell you real honestly, like Texas folks who are hockey fans, it's because they don't know anything about it, real sports.
Oh my God.
Like they don't know crap about football. They don't know crap about basketball. They don't know crap about baseball. And so
Toronto
like
better not make it back to the finals anytime soon because if McMahon is at the finals in Toronto, he's going to get taken down.
Hockey's like this newfangled hipster thing down here in Texas.
They've been there 25 or 30 years.
Okay, that's fairly newfangled to me. I was a teenager when they started bringing these stupid hockey fans.
Well, that was a long time ago, buddy.
Okay, well, I have not grown up since then.
Okay, now in fairness, he is talking about Texas hockey fans. He's not just talking about hockey fans as a whole. But he kind of shit on the NHL, but on the fans, and also said that it's like a newfangled hipster thing. Hockey is a newfangled hipster thing? That if you're a fan of hockey in Texas, it's a newfangled hipster thing. Does that make sense to anybody? Did I miss, like, is there, maybe I'm crazy. Did I miss like a massive infusion, an influx of hipsters? Like all this time that we heard, like, I don't know, Trump, for example, saying, well, Joe Biden was letting a lot of people in illegally through the southern border. Were they all like, did they all have like multicolored hair, nose rings, tattoos, and a propensity for creating amazing latte art made out of almond milk? Are those the people that were being let through the southern border? Because according to Tim McMahon, there's just a bunch of hipsters that showed up in Texas to celebrate this newfangled thing called hockey. They don't know anything about any other sports, but it's hockey. It's newfangled. I don't know what it is. Again, this guy is one of, I would say, the best basketball writers that ESPN has. But he goes on that show with Windhorse, and he's like, Texas hockey fans don't know anything about any other sports. They don't know anything about football. They don't know anything about, he said real sports, about hockey, about football, about baseball, about basketball. And so it's hockey. What are we talking about? Weird. Jerry Martin says, how are you going to shit on a product you're supposed to be promoting? Because it's on an ESPN show. I don't know if you saw it in the bottom Chiron, and if you're listening in the podcast feed, you didn't. But there's an ESPN Chiron on the bottom. Lower third has ESPN. They, again, have a TV rights package with the NHL. Probably not a great thing to shit on that league, especially right before the Stanley Cup Final. Okay. Connor Allen says, what an idiot. AJ says, holy shit, that's some bald-headed behavior right there. What an asshole. Let's not go after the follically challenged. Okay, one thing that we're not going to do on the show, we are not going to go after the follically challenged. Now, they might not all be follically gifted like yours truly. I get it. We talk about this almost every episode. I got the 5 head, or maybe it's a 7 head, but it has not receded. I'm going to keep saying it in the hopes that my hairline never changes. It could just stay here the whole time and it'd be totally fine. Connor says, being a Cowboys fan totally isn't a hipster thing to do. Andrew Fawcett, who does live in Texas, he is our man in Texas, says lots of transplants in Texas who are hockey fans. Makes zero sense because the Stars got a ton of fans because they won a cup, which would also imply that because the Stars have won a cup, they wouldn't all be newfangled hipster hockey fans. Okay. Joe Fisher says, haven't liked ESPN since maybe the mid-90s. They're always getting their info wrong and reporting stuff wrong. I remember watching a hockey game and the guy calling the game called the wrong 2 teams playing. That'd be pretty brutal. Tony goes, the green-haired people with nose rings are already here. They didn't come from Mexico. Why does that be Mexico? It could be from anywhere south of the border. Could also be from somebody who wasn't even south of the border. Could have been somebody from Scandinavia who just decided to come in because they're like, you have like Sigurd. Can we say Sigurd? Sigurd came from Scandinavia, like the Swedish chef or something. Coming through the border to go become a newfangled hipster hockey fan in Texas. Let's see. Jerry says he's just mad that basketball is regressing in the ratings. They haven't been great in the NHL playoffs so far, so Got to be careful there. Jerry says hockey's like a 200-year-old sport, same as baseball, just about older than football, older than basketball. Tell him to shove it. Woof. Stephen says, I miss Versus. It was better than ESPN. I will just point out really quickly, like, there are so many questionable things happening in sports media. A lot, okay? And I'm not going to sidetrack the show, go off the rails like I did the other day with Sheets and Wawa. Go back and check out Friday's episode if you missed it, because Sheets is invading Wawa territory, and I think it's the greatest thing to happen to Wawa in a very long time. They need competition. There are very questionable media things happening nationally. You're watching ESPN get ready to launch a standalone service that they're calling ESPN. They're not giving it a weird name. But ESPN's about to launch a standalone service so that you don't need to have a cable package, and you'll still get all of the games that would be on ESPN and ESPN Plus and all that. Okay. So they're trying to launch this thing. They have the rights to NBA and NHL, including Stanley Cup Final, NBA Finals. They've got all that. They went through a really brutal negotiating window for NBA rights, right, where we saw TNT lose the rights to the NBA and Amazon's getting involved and NBA on NBC, all that. So they have these rights. They've also effectively opted out of doing further business with Major League Baseball beyond this year. So that deal is effectively dead. Baseball will have to try to I still don't know where baseball is going to go. There were rumors a week or two ago that NBC might try to take Sunday Night Baseball, that might be them dipping their toes in. So now you're kind of seeing NBC build itself up, even though a year ago it killed off NBC Sports Network, the national one, also very interesting with Peacock. Still out there on the periphery, you'd think you'd want to have a sports product. It doesn't matter. So a lot of weird things are happening in sports media. We saw inside the NBA crew, they kind of did a bunch of their farewells, and they're going to be going to ESPN, but then there are questions about what that's going to look like. We might get into that on Wednesday's show, because there was an interesting Bill Simmons quote from his show that I kind of wanted to dive into as well. But you have a lot of these media things happening, and I wonder, there's part of me that goes, okay, if you're Tim McMahon, you're an NBA writer, you watched ESPN part ways with Zach Lowe, who was pretty much, I think, the undisputed best basketball writer at ESPN. And so they let Zach Lowe go. But Zach Lowe's not controversial. So is the idea here that you're trying to, maybe not intentionally and maybe not overtly, but in the back of your mind, you know that you need to start to make a couple of headlines, get aggregated. It's all good. ESPN maybe views it as any clicks and any views are good clicks and views. And is Tim McMahon saying this thing about hipsters, about hipster hockey fans in Texas? Does he do that because that's just how he feels? Does he do that because he's just comfortable on that show? Does he do it because he knows in the back of his mind, this will catch the eye of some of the folks on ESPN, and now where there's this vacuum, right, that they're trying to fill, whether it's programming where Around the Horn is gone, they're talking about the Rich Eisen show is going to run, I think, head-to-head with McAfee, but that's going to be on ESPN+. They're trying to figure out what their next thing is. Are there just going to be ESPN talent that are going to go rogue, or are going to throw out crazy shit and see if it maybe helps them raise their profile? And in fairness, it's not a bad tactic. But that was a weird out of nowhere quote on an NBA podcast to talk about Texas hockey fans being hipsters and that Texas sports fans don't know sports. And so they latch on to hipster hockey. I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting. Maybe you did too. I don't know. Let's see. We've got the Outdoor Life Network getting a shout out. Jerry giving a kudos to the Wawa Sheets conversation from Friday. Connor Allen says, if only ESPN Plus already existed. Joe Fisher says, ESPN is getting rid of MLB in a season or two. Opening day, ESPN used to be a 3-day event during the season. Not many MLB games on the first 3 days like years in the past. Connor Allen says, Russ Joy Plus coming soon. I mean, this kind of is Russ Joy Plus, right? This show. It's its own wonderful thing. Hexram says, ESPN is Disney, tells you everything. That's kind of true. Jerry Martin says about Rich Eisen's show, running head-to-head with McAfee, it's suicidal. It's not, though, because Eisen is a totally different show from McAfee. So it's, what would be really interesting to me is, do you ever get to a point where, Eisen's show catches enough interest on ESPN Plus that they run it on ESPN2? Because if you get into a thing where now you're paying McAfee all this money on ESPN, and then Eisen is on ESPN2, you are cannibalizing at least your Nielsen ratings on TV, would they run that risk? Because, like, in theory, if you don't like McAfee, chances are your brand of entertainment and sports news and all that is probably Eisen. Eisen is a much more straightforward presenter, right, than McAfee is. But would they run them both on TV? Even though a lot of people are cord cutters now, and even though, like, the idea of flipping channels and all that, like, doesn't exist the same way, like, would they run those two shows head to head? I don't know. I do not know. Andrew Fawcett says talent and ESPN should not be mentioned in the same sentence. Well, yeah. Okay, now, hear me out, because we have to get to where I was going before. I noted that on Phightin Words, they talked about Jesus Luzardo today, and they did. And I think that their conversation is very strong, and it was a thorough and thoroughly entertaining conversation. But I do have one issue that came out of the game where Luzardo didn't get pulled. And I thought that the Phillies waited too long, and I know that the bullpen sucks. I totally get it. But there is something to be said for not the mental health of a player, but, like, numbers do ultimately matter. And Jesus Luzardo, going into his start this weekend, I think was 4th in ERA in the National League. And now he's somewhere around, like, 25th because of one horrific outing where he got tagged for 12 runs. He gave up 12 runs in 3 1/3 innings. And there's a case to be made that Thompson probably could have pulled him about halfway through that. Now, allowing him to pitch to Rhys Hoskins again was a total mistake. And Hoskins on the day ends up clubbing 2 3-run home runs. And then that got everybody in their hearts and minds getting really excited.
Oh, Rhys Hoskins needs to come back. The Phillies should go out of their way to bring back Rhys Hoskins. Rhys had a really great season. It'd be really awesome if the Phillies had a batter like Rhys Hoskins. Wouldn't it be great if Rhys Hoskins was back in this lineup? He'd really bring a lot of power to the table. Rhys Hoskins is a guy that, like, I just don't want to really acknowledge the fact that he was always a shitty defensive player who drove us nuts and was really streaky. We don't need to talk about that. Rhys Hoskins would be great. He had 2 3-run home runs. We need Rhys Hoskins. Did I mention Rhys Hoskins?
The last thing I wanted coming out of a series with the Brewers was to have to listen to those people. I didn't want to have to pay them any mind. And yet, if you look at Hoskins' stats coming out of the series, because of that one, crooked game, Hoskins is now up to 9 home runs and 35 RBI on the season. He's hitting .270. He's 32 years old, and I don't want him anywhere near this team. Is that okay? Like, am I allowed to have the autonomy here on my own show to say I really don't want the Phillies to go back after Rhys Hoskins? I'd rather see them go after not literally anybody else, but, like, I think we kind of know what Rhys Hoskins was. He played 6 seasons here. We know what kind of a player Rhys Hoskins is. We know what a butcher he was at first base. You have Schwarber playing DH. Are you going to put Schwarber into the field now? You have no center fielder. Are you really going to, who are you going to put here's an idea. Why don't we put Trey Turner in center field? Let's put Trey Turner into center field. Let's call up Crawford. Let him play shortstop. And then we're gonna send Schwarber out to left field to bring in Rhys Hoskins. Or maybe we'll have Rhys Hoskins play first and let Bryce Harper be the DH when he comes back. Yeah, that's a great idea. No. Stop. Get some help. If your entire season is going to hinge on whether or not the Phillies bring back Rhys Hoskins or not, it will further confirm my entire belief this whole time that Dave Dombrowski kind of, like, fucked up this offseason. Okay? Rhys Hoskins is not the bat that you need to bring into this situation. You don't need to go back in time. Rhys Hoskins served his time as a Philly, and we thank him for his service. But you do not need to bring him back here. You should not bring him back here. In fact, I'd almost make the case it's the same thing that I say about Claude Giroux. Like, good player. Could he theoretically help you right now? Maybe. Do you need to go back in time? No, you don't. You do not. Move forward. There's no reason. We don't need Rhys Hoskins back. By the way, I don't know how this happened, but Andrew Fawcett said Edith. I guess he thought it was being Edith Bunker. Boyd away, Glenn Miller.
Songs that made the hit parade.
I don't know if that's the voice. Was that the voice?
We need Rhys Hoskins. Those were the days.
Jerry says Cartman.
Cameron's down here. We don't need Rhys Hoskins. Rhys Hoskins got respect my daughter.
No, we don't need that. Connor's right, though. Says Hoskins would come here and go 2 for 153. Exactly. Joe asks, where would Hoskins play? No one knows. Jerry says, after Rob got tossed, they should have pulled Luzardo. His Cy Young conversation is gone for the rest of the year, all because of one goddamn game. That's my problem. That's where I actually come in and I say, this is bad, bad, very bad. That's where I say this is an entirely unacceptable move by Rob Thompson. Allowing Luzardo to implode the way that he did and allowing Luzardo to remain in that game was a managerial nightmare. It was managerial malpractice. It should not have happened. Because while I fully understand that the bullpen sucks, and it does, while I fully understand that the last thing you want to do is burn out your bullpen, I do think that there is a human element to sports, and I do think that there's a very human element to confidence and to knowing that you are currently being regarded as one of the best players at your respective position. And up until this weekend, Jesus Luzardo was legitimately being discussed as a Cy Young candidate in the National League. We were talking about the fact that Jesus Luzardo was an incredible acquisition this offseason in what has been a mostly much maligned offseason by Dave Dombrowski. Jesus Luzardo was effectively a godsend to this team. And we've talked about it consistently on this show, and I'm sure every Phillies podcast this side of the Mississippi has had the same opinion. Luzardo has been sensational, has been a legitimate Cy Young candidate. And by virtue of leaving him in a game to give up 12 earned runs in 3 1/3 innings, you prioritized what was at that point probably a lost game in the midst of a lost series. You prioritized that over the long-term potential mental makeup of that player. Because look, I don't think Luzardo's now going to cave in on himself. I don't think he's going to fold, and I don't think he's going to all of a sudden become this shitty number 5 pitcher in the rotation. But when you're watching somebody struggle the way that he was, you get him out of the game. You have to get him out of the game. Because now his Cy Young season is over, and barring him having some incredible starts between now and the All-Star break, he's probably lost what was almost a shoo-in All-Star game appearance. And while that might not mean anything to you, or that might not mean anything to Rob Thompson, it does probably mean something to Jesus Luzardo. And being regarded as one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball probably meant something to Jesus Luzardo. And when you think about the confidence of the guy going forward, if you yank Luzardo out of that game earlier, say you yank him, I don't know, was it 8 runs in? It's still horrible. But pull him out then. Don't allow the last few runs to come across. You could make the case that pull him at any point before that. And you don't see his ERA go from 4th to 20-something. You don't see him probably lose any chance of trying to compete for the Cy Young. You don't see him lose what should have been a shoo-in for an All-Star game appearance. And what you've effectively done now is you got lost in the micro, which was that game that you very clearly were probably not going to win because the Phillies were an underperforming nightmare against the Brewers. You prioritized that game, and in doing so, you may have lost a very mentally strong, confident pitcher. Now, I'm not saying that his confidence is going to be so rattled that he's going to fall apart, but I do openly question the decision because what you are doing is opening up the possibility that the guy starts to doubt himself. And that is the real issue. If Luzardo now goes out and he's a number 3-ish pitcher, which is kind of what you wanted him to be anyway, but if he ends up becoming a number 3-ish, number 4 kind of starter, because now he's gotten himself messed up. He got turned inside out in 3 1/3 innings, giving up 12 earned runs, which almost never happens, by the way, in that few of innings. Allowing him to do that ended up potentially mentally breaking your pitcher. That could be bad, bad, very bad for this team. The last thing this team needs is one of their starters to kind of get lost in his own head, especially given how shitty the bullpen's been. It was a bold strategy by the Phillies. I think it was ultimately a massive mistake. And I know that we're supposed to talk about how you play to win the game. I get it, Herm. You play to win the game. I get it. But at that point, I'm prioritizing my player. I'm prioritizing my potential Cy Young candidate and just telling him, shake this one off. It was bad, sure. Burn the film. Burn the film. Get rid of it all. Hard to do that when you allow him to give up 12 runs and essentially kill his chance of being considered one of the best pitchers in the National League. Okay, last thing I wanted to get to, because there are people over here. saying, Dee Dee said, don't make the sound ever again. I don't know which one I made. It's probably the Edith Bunker voice. Spencer Turnbull on YouTube says, Philly should have re-signed me. I was such a Turnbull fan. I thought he got screwed. Connor says, Phightin Words is the only Phillies podcast. Joe says, or did Luzardo get a big head because he was pitching well at the time? No, I don't think he got a... Well, listen, if he did get some kind of an ego and he had the fourth best ERA going into this weekend, I think that would probably be earned. He pitched incredibly well all season. So, you have that. Okay, last thing. Saquon Barkley is on the cover of Madden. And I know that we all used to worry, and especially if you're around my age, you used to really worry about the Madden curse, the Madden cover curse. But Saquon Barkley is on the cover of Madden 26. We are not going to start worrying about whether or not he's going to get hurt this season. We are not worried about that at all. Everything's going to be fine. Just keep telling yourself that. Everything's going to be fine. But here's Saquon gracing the cover of Madden 26. And I think there was a question, like if Saquon ends up becoming the cover athlete for Madden, were they going to feature the reverse hurdle? And they did. And it is incredible. This is one of the best Madden covers I think I've ever seen. It is an iconic moment. It's an iconic image. And ultimately, it's something that I don't like to think back to old versions of the game. But man, when we're looking back on this, it's going to be something. Now, I saw the question over here. Did you see the video of him doing it? I'm actually going to flash to it really quickly. We're going to try to be really, really careful here with how we show this on the screen for a whole bunch of different reasons. So we're going to keep it like this. But here's Saquon reenacting it over on... So he's on... think about how ridiculous this is, by the way. So we're going to just pause. I think it was around here. He's up on... They have him on the harness, right? So instead of him actually trying to reverse hurdle a dude in a studio, they had him up on the straps. They had him up on... What the hell is the thing called? It goes around your waist. The harness. They have him up on the harness. They have him up high, recreating the reverse hurdle. It's an awesome thing. But that's not why I brought this up, because there's something that you're going to notice if you're in Philly. There's something that is going to be massively different. And that, of course, is that Geno's is not going to be Geno's for this week, apparently. Geno's is rebranding. I've read that it's going to be for the week. But Geno's is going to be rebranding in Philly as Staquon's. So Geno's for the week is poised to be Staquon's. Now, what do you think of that name? 610-632. I love a good viral marketing campaign. Is that going to get it done? Is that going to get people really hyped? I don't know. I don't really know anybody who likes going to Geno's as it currently stands. No offense to the fine folks at Geno's, who I'm sure do a great job, put a lot of passion and love into what they do. But I think I've only ever gone to Geno's once. I don't know if that really moves the needle. But will you go to Staquon's now? Will you go there to get your picture taken with the signage? You guys can let me know in the comments. I thought it was funny. I actually love the fact that you're getting this kind of love for Saquon, though. It feels like, even though he didn't really get in the MVP conversation the way that he should have, even though he probably should have been somebody who should have probably ended up winning the MVP or should have been in stronger consideration, he's getting a little bit of love. By the way, the video, I showed you guys what the hurdle looked like with the straps, with the harness. There was an actual video, and I guess this is what the final image was, or maybe it was a mashup of the two. But here's Saquon reverse hurdling as part of the shoot. Look at this. It's incredible. It's awesome stuff. Anyway, that's what I have for you today. So, Madden 26 cover. We've got that. Oh, God, people are trashing Geno's in the comments. Good thing I don't have it over here in the little comments section. You can let me know how you feel about Geno's. You can let me know what your favorite cheesesteak spot in the city is. Actually, do that for me. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or even X, you can drop your favorite comment, your favorite cheesesteak place in the comments. If you watch after the fact, go into the regular comments section. Let me know what you agreed with, disagreed with on the show today, your favorite cheesesteak spot, all that. Please do me a favor, though. If you're on YouTube, like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Liking the video is very important. Commenting on the video actually helps a lot. So if you can, go out of your way to the regular comments section and just drop what you agreed with, disagreed with, anything else. Drop it in the comments. That helps. If you share it, even if you're sharing it again to your spouse, to your friend, to your loved one, to an ex-girlfriend that you never officially broke up with or something, like, I don't know, last year or 20 years ago, you could send it to her too. Whatever makes you happy. Okay? Like the video, share the video, subscribe, ring the bell so you get notified when the show goes live. I'll be back on Wednesday. I've been told that Snow the Goalie this week might be a special one, so you'll have to keep an eye out for that. Still waiting to confirm that. We're also working on something else with Snow the Goalie, so we'll keep you posted there. It's just wrestling might happen this week. I don't know. We'll see. Wednesday, I'll be back with this show. Phightin Words dropped a new episode earlier today, so make sure you go subscribe to that show and you listen to Bob and Ant talk about the Phillies in explicit detail. Until Wednesday, this has been the Russ Joy Show, and I've been Russ Joy, but you knew that already because you're smart, and it's also the name of the show. I will talk to each and every one of you on Wednesday here on the Russ Joy Show. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Have a marvelous Monday, and I'll talk to you Wednesday here on the Russ Joy Show. Bye now.